have a AAA Car Sound Masterclass from Sounding Sweet. So let me introduce you to Ed Walker and Simon Barford.
Hi, my name is Ed. Welcome to AAA Car Sound Masterclass. I'm a sound supervisor at Sounding Sweet. I started my game audio career at Codemasters on the Dirt, Grid and Formula One racing franchises before joining Playground Games on the Forza Horizon series. And I started my own business 13 years ago, Sounding Sweet, and I naturally carried on with a passion for all things car sound and audio because I'm a petrol head probably. These are some of the games that I and Sounding Sweet have had the pleasure of being credited on. Let me introduce Simon Barford.
Hello everybody, yeah, I'm Simon Barford. I joined Sounding Sweet last year as audio director. I've been in the industry for 16 years now, across many genres, platforms, quite old. I was most recently head of audio at Natural Motion, part of Zynga, and I was at Blitz Games before that in Leamington Spa. I've also done some work in the music industry. So we are experienced in audio direction, technical audio system design, sound design and implementation of sound effects in interactive vehicle simulation, immersive mixing and field recording. That's our kind of core. Okay.
So we wanted to share our experience and thought processes for working with cars in racing games in the hope that that experience might be useful to game audio developers that have vehicles in their game, not necessarily a racing game, but the same thought process and methodology that we bring to the things that we're thinking about in racing games. We wanted to impart that experience in order that you might be able to take some of that into your titles. For me, it's about the character and the detail of the sound, and ironically, despite being a machine, vehicles seem to have an organic, complex sound full of imperfection and personality. Vehicles have many complex connected mechanical components, many of which we'll hear and cover during this talk. Car sound is an incredibly broad subject. So today we're just going to focus on modern supercars, but there are lots of things to consider with older and classic cars that have a unique character, and electric and hybrid cars is a whole other talk. So we're going to start by playing a short video of the sound of different types of engine configurations. We'll demonstrate how cars sound cool, but also they all sound very different.
So the main body of this presentation is focused on the complexities of the different mechanical systems and the sounds that they create. And then we will look more briefly at the creative and technical direction, systems and technology, recording, post-production, collaboration, future-proofing, and then hopefully some Q&A. But that's a lot in 45 minutes. Here we go. So we're going to listen to some isolated components where we've identified the areas of detail and personality that we consider important. So we'll go through the exhaust, the engine, induction, interior, the transmission, exterior and trackside perspectives, wheels and surfaces, Foley, and some other considerations and some processing. The audio examples that follow are mostly going to be presented in the same format, which is a short section of revving, followed by a second gear sweep, which is basically an acceleration from idle to red line, and then a deceleration back down to idle. just to make it relatively quick for the talk. A fourth gear sweep would be much longer. So let's get into it, starting with the exhaust.
So here we've highlighted the areas of interest on this Fiesta R5, which is a 4-cylinder rally car. It's turbo charged 4-cylinder rally car. And the areas we've highlighted caused me to think about how I might try and take these areas of interest and personality and what I might need to do with them to put them into a game. So let's have a listen to it. So this is an exhaust again, but on this time it's a 1,000 horsepower twin turbo Ford Mustang V8. So again, I've marked up the areas of interest. Let's have a listen to this. Savage. So for the exhaust, the most obvious areas of interest are the limiter, the burbles, the pops. And in this video, you'll hear some examples of how these sounds that I've identified in those examples have been extracted and isolated in order that then they can be broken into components that we want to consider in terms of adding that personality back into the game. The rev limiter is a way the car protects itself from exploding into lots of pieces. When it gets to the top of the RPM range, you often hear that with the bouncing of the limiter. And the burbles and pops are caused by the fuel being ignited within the exhaust system. The main point here is that these areas of interest, if they're left in the main exhaust sound being played back every time you let off the throttle in the game, you're going to get the same and you want it more interesting because that's how vehicles are in real life, as I was saying at the beginning, with the organic nature of the way that these characteristics are played in real life.
Okay, so staying with the same 1,000 horsepower Mustang, which was incredible, let's move on to the engine. The changes in sound throughout the RPM range of an engine are usually mostly timbre rather than momentary, such as the pops and burbles, but will often include the rev limiter. Okay, now we can look at the induction. The induction or aspiration is how the engine takes in air. More oxygen allows the engine to burn more fuel, give it more power. We've pushed the engine back in the mix here, just so we can focus on the twin turbo sound of the Mustang. A turbocharger is a type of forced induction, so it increases the density or pressure of the air, and usually it's driven by the exhaust gas. Pressure builds up and is also released. So the main areas of interest for a turbo are the spooling up, the pressure building up as the car accelerates, and the sound they make as the pressure is released, which is based on the amount of turbo pressure at the point of release. So here's an example of these isolated twin turbo assets within Wise. So as you can hear, there's a lot of variation there, a lot of different control and different things that can happen, which is why when you're thinking kind of AAA, you want to get all of that detail there. Okay.
So the air intake of a naturally aspirated car still has an exciting sound. It might not sound quite as exciting as that in terms of the, but you can hear the car breathing as the air sucked into the air intake, and it has more of a raw type of sound. And then as the car is decelerating, it's not breathing in any air, so there is no sound on the decel. Save you all that silence. So finally, let's have a listen to a supercharger, which again is a type of forced induction, which has a typical whine sound that you'd expect. This is on a different V8 Ford Mustang. Let's have a listen. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, let's have a look at the interior of the cabin. So the interior sound of a car is a combination of all the components we've just heard, plus other elements such as the surface noise, just the whole concoction, basically. Different cars have a different experience of those sounds in the interior, so they might need their own treatment. A lot of modern cars have extreme soundproofing, Bentleys, Bugattis, Rolls-Royces. It can be very refined. Many manufacturers tune the sound of their interior to enhance the driving experience to their taste. We'll often need to consider that when recording and implementing, particularly for authentic vehicles. So in this example, it's a rally car, the same Fiesta as earlier. Doesn't have any sound deadening, it's all stripped out. You can hear the resonance of the body, the chassis, the gearbox and transmission is coming through, it's very obvious, and you can hear things such as the wobble and the flexing of the drivetrain. Okay, so in this example, the transmission whine that we've just heard from the interior's perspective has now been isolated and flattened in order that it can be looped and driven by the game at runtime based on the transmission RPM. It would then be modulated to add back in that wobble that has been removed. This particular recording was a contact mic attached to a transmission tunnel housing. Okay.
So we've heard a lot of close perspective, isolated examples, and now we're going to play a few clips of cars from an external perspective. So I've marked up the areas of interest as we've got used to, and this is a combination of all of the components that we've heard from how we're used to listening to vehicles and cars from an external perspective. This is a Bugatti Chiron Mammoth 16-cylinder quad turbo. This is the same twin turbo V8 Mustang that we heard before. Again, a Mustang, but with the supercharger. What I love about this is that you can hear the supercharger as the car's coming towards you, but then you can't really hear it as it goes away. So it's those kind of observations that we're assessing in these examples, and that's the kind of information that I want to know when I'm implementing sound into a game when it comes to a vehicle. This is the Ford Fiesta R5 again. And this is a naturally aspirated V12 Pagani Zonda. So that was quite a lot of examples, but it demonstrates that vehicles that seemingly look fairly similar can actually sound incredibly different, and there's a broad variation of the types of sounds that they make. If you're dealing with licensed authentic supercars, then there are a ton of petrol heads in the world that will have an impression of how that car should sound, and their expectations are well, they have expectations, and they expect the they expect a Pagani Zonda to sound like a Pagani Zonda. Okay, Si.
Thank you. So we'll now have a brief look at tyres and surfaces with examples of the sound created by different types of movements. So we're going to hear rolling. The wheels and tyres are moving in the same direction and speed as the vehicle. Scrubbing, the tyre starting to lose traction, lateral slip, usually on the front wheels. Skidding, the tyre moving against the direction of travel, can be any and all of the wheels. Peeling and burnout, so the tyre is spinning faster than the vehicle speed. And then locking, the tyre isn't spinning, but the vehicle is moving. So these different actions and sounds may be required for each surface, rumble strip, grass, gravel, whatever it may be, and those tyres may be across multiple surfaces at once. You need to cater for all of that. Or you may need to. Okay, so car Foley. It's not just door shuts and the horn. In lots of games, you can interact with a car in many ways, and not only drive it. So we might require specific indicator sounds for a particular vehicle. Perhaps it's buttons, switches, window winders. We've listed many more examples here. Wipers, handbrake, indicators, pop-up headlights. The horn is very important though. Okay.
So there are lots of things to think about, and these are some of the things that we often also think about. The modification of a vehicle in a video game, if it has an upgrade path as part of the gameplay, or for example, if a car was in a crash in the game and the exhaust fell off, what might it sound like? Is it okay for it to just sound like it's still got the exhaust, or is it important that it has a different sound? What happens if it's repeatedly crashed into a wall and it's got some sort of it looks mechanically damaged? Does it need to have engine misfire and a different way of portraying that from an audio point of view? There's suspension to think about. What's the ride height of the vehicle like? The landing sounds, vibration of the chassis. If it was a Dakar Rally Trophy truck, for example, you might be going off big jumps. And the age of the vehicle can also be important here. If it's an older car, you might get if it's kind of going over a speed bump, but in a modern car, you wouldn't get that kind of sound. You just get a very small as the suspension shocks take the pressure. And weather is a big consideration. The rain on the vehicle itself. There's lots of different material types on a car. Certainly with modern cars, carbon fiber, there's glass, there could be plastic, aluminium, metal. If it's a soft top convertible, it's got a fabric roof potentially. And if it's raining on those different components on the vehicle, there's different material types. One would expect the sound to be correct from a carbon fiber bonnet, for example, and that also goes for impacts. So if you crash a car into a wall, you'd expect, and the spoiler falls off, you'd expect to hear carbon fiber spoiler, not metallic components.
Okay, so processing and effects. We listen to a lot of the recordings. When we're there on the recording sessions, we're not just thinking about isolated components. We're thinking and listening to how the car sounds in real life in those environments. So when driving around in a game, we may want to hear reflections from close buildings, overhangs, gantries, bridges. Different materials can have a large impact. Sound behaves very differently when reflecting on concrete to being absorbed by a grass bank. Dopplers can be essential to the sound of a vehicle from an external perspective, from what you'd expect. We may also need to consider the speed of sound and kind of adjusting delays. If a car is some way off in the distance and the exhaust pop accompanies a VFX flash, you may expect to hear the pop after seeing the flash. So creative and technical direction, these are some of the first things we think about when designing vehicles. What gives this vehicle its personality? What kind of sounds can or could it make? How important is authenticity? It's not always. We may consider, is it a simulation? Is it more cinematic? How much should we enhance and process the source recordings, embellish the experience? What are the art pillars? How cinematic is the visual presentation and gameplay? How authentic do we need to be? Is it a known real car? How could we inject personality details such as the rev limiter, pops, transmission wind, turbo dumps, all of that for a fictional vehicle? You can really go to town. So for technology, is it necessary to use or develop a particular type of audio technology to achieve a AAA audio experience? So there are two popular techniques for driving car audio at runtime: crossfading loops and granular synthesis. So for loops, they're played across regions of the RPM range. Their pitch is adjusted at runtime, and each range is crossfading into the next. Loops can't contain a lot of variation and detail just due to their looping nature. You couldn't have a little kind of blip in the middle and keep hearing it, So however, the detail and personality can be added as additional layers or one-shots and affected based on game parameters at runtime. Likely be side-chained into the relevant layers of the core sound. Loops can sound great when there is a slow rate of change in RPM, like when a vehicle is going fast in a high gear. Granular synthesis, sound is broken down into tiny grains to be reconstructed and processed at runtime. There are a number of granular synthesis toolsets available, such as Rev, shown here, and often racing game developers choose to build their own tech. Granular synths, they like long sweeping content as input. For example, a fourth gear sweep accelerating from idle to red line, decelerating back down to idle again. Granular synthesis is great when there's a fast rate of change in RPM. When a vehicle is revving, accelerating fast, often we would want to incorporate a combination of loops and granular synthesis. So if we are using a loop-based system alongside granular, we're still going to need to create or record the loops, which would usually imply recording held RPMs on a dyno, which we'll talk about later, or using a toolset that will enable us to cut static loops from sweeping content like this flattener from Tasman Audio. Before we get into the pros and cons of recording on track or dyno, let's take a look at sourcing the vehicle. So when sourcing a vehicle to record, we always like to audition it, at the very least research the sound carefully before setting up a session. The same car model can sound very different depending on spec, modifications, even if they contain the same engine. So these three cars all contain the exact same 4-litre V8 bi-turbo engine. So yeah, very different. And if I just source the engine, who knows what I would get.
So now we'll have a look at some of there are two main recording techniques, either on a hub dyno or rolling road in a like in the picture here in a semi-anechoic chamber, or on a track, which we'll have a look at some of the pros and cons of each technique. So for a hub dyno, there are various advantages. You can get held RPMs, so you can easily record loops under full load. The load is simulated. There's no road noise. There's no weather concern because it can't rain inside. The hub dyno's quieter than a rolling road because the hub dyno is attached straight to the hubs of the car, so there's no tyre touching anywhere, or there are no wheels on it. And it's possible to move a hub dyno around. You could take a hub dyno out into a field if you wanted to, and record with it outside. There are disadvantages to a hub dyno. There's basically very unrealistic deceleration. As soon as you let off the throttle, the deceleration sound is not what you'd expect. You don't get the pops and crackles that's the most exciting part. There's usually a large noisy fan in front of the car blowing air through the car to help cool it, because cars get very hot. and it's not moving, so there's no airflow. So you need a fan to blow at the car. The interior recording is unrealistic because there's no tires touching the road, and the vibration is different. It can be quite a high cost, and modern cars can be very difficult to run on a hub dyno as well, especially with more modern supercars. They're becoming very picky about whether they'll be happy to run on a hub dyno or not, to do with the traction control, and the car knows it's not on the road, so it doesn't play ball so easily. And there's no launch control, there's no drifting, there's no stunts and burnouts, which is fun, but the main point is that that's really useful content for cinematics and cutscenes and other types of audio you might need. And it's also a great reference point for how the vehicle should sound in the game, or in a game. Oh, sorry, we haven't looked at on track. So there's advantages of on track. I'll go through these relatively quickly. There's real load and acceleration. There's real deceleration. There's no fans or extractor sounds. You can get pass-bys, drive-offs, drive-ins. You get real interior sound. It allows for real maneuvers, and it's the most realistic recording result. And the disadvantages are there's quite a lot of road noise. The quality of the road could be an issue. The road length is limited. Even here, we've got a mile or so of straight road, but the road runs out. Whereas on a hub dyno, you can go as far as you like. The weather is the biggest issue, really, because it's unpredictable, especially in the UK, and it can quite easily start raining during a session, and we have to keep a very close eye on what's going to be happening from a weather point of view. And there's other stuff going on, like birds and planes and environmental sound that you wouldn't get on a hub dyno.
Okay, so vehicles are very difficult to record when you're at the session, but getting everything set up and organized is a huge challenge in itself. So these are some of the things that we think about. Safety, everyone's got to wear high vis, make sure the vehicle is checked and kind of mechanically sound. We take fire extinguishers, we're very careful about where we position people and equipment. Logistics side, so trailering of a vehicle, they may not want to drive it to the session and add all these miles onto these supercars. Scheduling the rigging, time and location. Hospitality, well-fed people are happy people. There's a lot of subtlety to dealing with car owners and drivers, keeping a session running smoothly. If a driver maybe doesn't feel looked after, they may be less likely to get the maneuvers or do the maneuvers that we're asking for. Moves such as burnouts and launch control and these kind of higher end things. And then session prep, is the track surface clean? As Ed said, the weather, we need to check airflow over the vehicle, look at the proposed mic placements, briefing the owner and the driver about what's going to happen, so there's no surprises. There's usually a shot list. Make sure the batteries are charged, SD cards formatted to the recorder. We have radio contact between the car and between the recordists. We usually use DPA microphones, sound devices, recorders, 5 or 6 Omni labs, perhaps small cardioid condensers, contact mics, looking at the air intake, turbo supercharger, these sorts of things. 5 or 6 Omni labs, maybe pencil condensers on the exhausts. We tend to go for ambitonic or surround sound mics in the cab. Perhaps we'll use some labs. Then at trackside, we'll have stereo mics, shotguns, cardioids, each trackside location, handhelds and static microphones. Tim and the Frontier team spoke about their pass-bys earlier. Handhelds allow a mixture of microphone movements to track them. Maybe you go opposite direction and get like a sharper peak. You can get a bit of control that way. Okay.
So then once we've been out and done all this recording, we collate it usually into Reaper, because Reaper's great at dealing with this kind of content. And we add lots of markers for the detailed information, even if it's not immediately relevant. We try and mark up as much of the content as possible, because in the future it's likely to be useful, even if it's not relevant at the moment. We're likely to want to process these recordings with could be distortion, compression, EQ, usual plugin type of processing, but you've got to be careful with the amount of processing you do before tracking, because if you're going to put the assets into something like Rev, and you've distorted it and over processed it, then it can make the tracking very difficult. So quite often what we do is do the tracking on a completely sterile, natural recording, like you've heard for the first lot of stuff, and then swap it out with a processed version if the tracking becomes a problem. So we're going to have a quick look at collaboration. Vehicle audio is a team sport. Analysis can be very useful for other dev disciplines and groups, such as physics, the rate of change of the engine RPM, gear ratios, the amount of wobble in the driveline flex, turbo pressure, the inertia in the engine braking. These are all things that you can get a good understanding from the audio recordings, and that information then can be passed to physics to help with the sound in the game, and you can clearly see how long it takes for a gear to change from third to fourth, for example. You can see it takes X amount of milliseconds, and that information then can get passed to gameplay so that you can have accurate gear changes, and also we can drive things from the car sound, like, for example, exhaust pops. Might want to drive the muzzle flashes from the exhaust, like that, and we can do that from the audio recordings. So we've got a lot of useful information.
Okay, so future proofing. Comprehensive recordings can enable future tech development. There can be a reference point. As mentioned earlier, analyzing real-world reflections and vehicle sounds from a distance once the sound has had a chance to develop in the environment can help with post-production processing in the vehicle assets and in the game mix. Technology-wise, granular synthesis is well established. Full synthesis technology is starting to sound good. With the development of AI and comprehensive recordings, the future of AAA vehicle audio is very exciting. Getting broad coverage of the car's audio during that recording can be very useful for future. These are very expensive sessions. You don't want to have to redo it.
Thank you very much. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. If anybody's got anything, go on.
Thank you very much. This was really cool to hear a comprehensive breakdown on vehicle audio. You've mostly talked about, supercars. I was wondering if you could share some light on open vehicles like ATVs, buggies, and motorcycles as well.
I think the same. Basically, the idea really of the talk was to inspire thought about what areas of detail and what are the personality traits that I need to identify on an ATV. Is it the whistling of the air through the roll cage? Is it something about? Is it turbocharged? Are there lots of exhaust pops? I think all of the same thought processes really apply, not just to ATVs, but I mean to maybe a bit of a reach, but helicopters have superchargers, turbos, aeroplanes. It's more a thought of these are the areas that are interesting, and now for yourself to try and identify the areas on the particular vehicles you may be working with to carry these thoughts into your work.
Nice one, thank you.
So one thing I've always struggled with when working on AAA audio games is recreating the dynamics of the original source recording in engine. Have you had that similar problem, and how have you addressed it?
Yes. You can leave the dynamics in the recording and leave it natural, but maybe not give you a lot of control. Sometimes we call it sausaging. That's not the technical term, but basically make everything the same dynamic throughout the RPM range, and then you're going to simulate the dynamics back at runtime, maybe over load, maybe over RPM, both. That can be some filtering, it can be volume. It's needs based, depends on the game, what you're trying to achieve, but it's something that can be a struggle. But it's again, is it simulation? Is it cinematic? What kind of mix? What controls do you want can make that?
I think it depends on the tech as well. If you're using loops, then it's got to be all the same volume, because you can't, and you've got to put the dynamics back in at runtime. Whereas you could get away with more dynamic range in granular synths because you're sweeping through granular content.
And if you're using both, how do they combine and jump around? Yeah, that's a whole other talk.
Great talk, guys. Oh, I've lost my voice. It's the end of Develop. Great talk. I really enjoyed it. I was just wondering about the interesting turbo isolation you did, and that kind of those interesting artifacts. Are you RXing, or are you actually isolating using mic techniques there?
Both.
Okay.
So I mean, a mic in the air intake is going to pick up very little engine noise, and you're not going to get any exhaust noise really. I mean, actually, that turbo that is probably, I don't know if it's been through RX, but that's how it comes off the recorder pretty much.
It's amazingly clean. It's really good. Yeah.
It can depend on the intake. Is it a closed box? Where can we get to? Does the driver mind? Does the owner mind if we start taking things apart, sticking things in, making sure they can't get sucked into the engine? But yeah, we try to get as clean as possible where we can. But RX can be saving.
You're right. That's the point, though. Is using the mic technique early on, then you don't have to go through all the pain afterwards.
Sure.
Yeah, when you're integrating into the game, how much would you rely on variation in recording rather than like randomization in something like Wise? Like taking away, at what point would it take away the authenticity of the actual recorded sound? Well,
that can depend on things like footprint. How many vehicles? Is it a racing game where they're like the lead singer and you can use all the resources? You may do a lot of sharing, so certain kind of like the pops and things, you may put those across 50 vehicles from one set. So it's a balancing act. We try not to put in 60 pops for one size at one pressure, and it can get a bit beyond. But we try to be the personality and the organic nature of it, as Ed said, is those differences, and you're not learning and you're not hearing repeating. So the more you can do that, obviously the runtime does allow volume changes and pitch changes and filter changes, and so you can get a lot out of it that way. Again, it's down to what you want to do.
I think you'd get more mileage out of playing 10 pops at greater variation in terms of like when they're actually triggered, rather than having the same triggering but loads of different pops. Like the maximum the maximum difference you can make is really on the randomization of the event triggering rather than the
You can get
in that case anyway.
It can start to become rhythmic. You know, you're learning these patterns.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but I'm sure you can catch them after the conference.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.